ignorance is bliss.
And welcome back to Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. Victoria, I was just telling you during the break, you were cheated and ripped off on Sunday. You might not even know it.
I'm stunned.
You were bamboozled.
You mean I could have been depressed about this all week?
You were tricked.
A wave of financial tomfoolery.
There was some serious tomfoolery that has been unleashed.
These corporate mischief
Was it by hooligans?
You were cheated by hooligan scamsters, as it turns out on Sunday. Because, and I know this is true, how you were cheated.
Yeah, tell me.
Because you went to church on Sunday. I saw you there.
Yeah, I was there.
And you went to a church where the community read through and talked about the book of Mark, chapter 12.
Yes.
Which involves lots of things.
It does.
Including a culminating story where Jesus, our Lord, sits across.
As opposed to Jesus, our friend.
As opposed to Jesus, the guy that works on your roof.
My electrician.
Jesus, the Lord, sits across from the area at the temple.
Yes.
Where people are putting their gifts and offerings in.
Mm-hmm.
And the reading was, and people are coming and they're giving many, many gifts and offerings at the temple.
Yeah.
And then the story says that a poor widow, a little old woman, haggard from life.
She could have been tall.
No. She's small. A small, haggard, bent-over woman who had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Pulled out 2 small copper coins, the story says, worth less than a penny.
Yes.
And threw them into the offering receptacle. And Jesus, our Lord, says, that woman there, she put in more than all the rest because they all gave out of their excess. She gave everything she had.
So I'm cheated because everybody just gave out of their excess?
And you were cheated because your preacher, your curator, your conversation facilitator,
who shall remain unnamed but has the initials DP,
said nothing about what that story was actually about.
Wasn't that because the kids came back?
Nope. He will often blame it on the children because he's like that. He's a guy that would say,
"Oh, the kids are back. We got to quit talking."
This whole plan would have worked if it wasn't for those meddling kids. He would go Scooby-Doo up on you. No. It's because your preacher, who cheated you out of the meaning of that story, the implication of that story, the aha moment of why that story is included in the Gospels, didn't know.
Yeah.
Didn't know. And the reason your preacher didn't know is because your preacher had in his head another version of that story.
Really?
Because I had used that story when I was used to be a youth evangelist type and camp speaker. It was one of the stories in my set when I would go to a camp or a retreat.
Oh, would you do the altar call and get all the teenagers to
I didn't like
cry?
this. So right, I didn't like those altar calls, but I knew the order of how these retreats work.
Yeah.
You get 4 talks. You get a Friday, you get a Saturday morning, you get a Saturday night, and you get a Sunday morning.
You know, I grew up to going to those camps.
Yeah, and something special is supposed to happen, and the kids gear up, and everybody gears up. Like it's you know.
It's
It's
an
a
emotional
version
arc.
of Valentine's Day for the couple married 3 years. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a plan in place. And
I don't have those kinds of
There's a
Valentine's
place
Day.
this is going.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to also end with,
People
crying
on their
and-
knee. Oh, always
people on
crying.
their knees crying and self-loathing, much like the
Rededicating,
couple and thing. No. All right. So I would tell that story. And I would use that story as an illustration of, look, there are some people, I mean, this was pretty genius. There are some people, they have a lot they need to turn over to God. But maybe you just have that one thing you're holding on to. That one thing, as the story says, she gave everything she had to live on. What's that one thing in your life that you feel like you're ordering your life around and you want to give that up to God so that you can live in God's life? So we would give people, when I would do this talk set, two pennies when they would come in, and we would put a metal dish so that the kids could throw their
Nice.
coins in, and then it starts ringing through their. And I mean, this
I
is
can just feel the manipulation.
boom.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and I was, if I could say, I was careful to say, and maybe there's nothing.
I'm sure you thought you were doing a really, really good thing. I
Yibbity
don't
yabbity
doubt
yabbity
that.
yab 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 yab. I was yapping away at these kids. So that story's caught in my head. So in my head, this woman in the story is to be understood as the exemplar. You peoples who've read this story should be more like that woman. Was going on in my head. So on Sunday, I tried to set all that stuff aside. But what was still in my head was, you're supposed to be like that woman. Well, at Solomon's Porch, we do progressive communal dialogue. Right? So people say things. At the 7 o'clock, a fellow who'd never been there before, a stranger, yea, an outsider, a man that one would have no history to trust in his opinion, is there. And we're talking about it in the way that the 7 o'clock talked about it, which is always different than the 5 because it's made in real time and so on. So we're talking about this story, and this fellow raises his hand and says, well, I think that we're supposed to read this story as there's an example of how treacherous the religious and temple system would be, how abusive it would be, that it would even extract the last 2 coins from that woman's life.
Oh.
And when Jesus sits across that temple, what he had just said a paragraph earlier was, watch out for the teachers of the law in this whole structure, because they will cheat widows out of their homes. Remember that?
Yes, I
Then
do.
he sits down, looks across, sees an old widow. Some people are putting in lots of things out of their excess. Fine for them. Works great for them. The religious system's grooving for them. They're getting rid of their excess. They still have plenty to live on. But that same system, that will take from you everything you've got, he says. And I'm like, boom. There, of course,
Yeah.
without progressional dialogue,
We would have never had
I
it.
stay stuck in she's an exemplar, as opposed to what I think the context of Mark, as we were reading in chapter 12, wants us to see. No, Jesus is saying I'm not just opposed to this religious temple run amok system because I think there's a better one. It's bad for people. It will strip the last pennies out of that. Now she has nothing to live on. And the shame is, from the passage earlier, the ones who are supposed to protect her,
aren't doing it.
the temple of God that is supposed to come around and support those will extract the last 2 copper coins from them. So here at 5 o'clock, you get bamboozled,
Right.
and at 7 o'clock, people get a little taste of the truth. Now, it could be that in 5 years, I'm going to be telling that story, and then in 5 years, I'm going to look back and go, I used to think that story was about how the temple system would
I think that's
extract the very
happened
last
before on
pennies out of
Sunday
last few pennies out of a woman. But for now,
That's
I grant,
it.
I
Doesn't
I
he say
give you my
that woman
apologies.
is great, though, in that passage? Doesn't he say she's good because she gave?
Yeah, not in Mark.
He says it somewhere else.
It might be somewhere else where there's sort of that woman who followed the whole system, honor be to her.
I
Good
wish
th-
I had my Bible here. I should bring my Bible to
should-
the show. Jeez.
Wow.
Doug Pagitt Radio,
you-
bringing people to the Bible.
What you should have done was hidden it in your heart. And
Thanks.
it's with you at all times.
Thanks. So pastorally.
So
kind
the
of you.
power of this to me is that preaching has to be this communal act. Because people know things at times that need to be offered up to one another. And sometimes, the preacher gets in the way. Sometimes the preacher opens it up. And sometimes the preacher is the stranger sitting in the chair that's never been there before.
Yeah.
That's the
It's
like,
always
because
very
then
beautiful.
we're all that way. And it's curious to me that with all the energy in the room at the 5, all the good things, all the salt of the earth and the light of the world that's in that room. Nobody no. It took this other guy. How come
Well,
we
the
didn't see it?
the
Fantastic.
conversation is always different, but it's beautiful because I think in some ways, I know sometimes at 7 o'clock you represent things that people have said at 5 o'clock, and then it gets to build, and it's
that
all
happens.
about
That happens quite often. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a nice. I wish I could go to the 7 o'clock
But it doesn't.
too,
But it never works in reverse.
No, well,
This was the first. This was the
because we don't
first.
have a time machine.
This was the first. See, totally. Once again, what are people doing? We could just another example where we
only.
could have used a time machine.
I know.
I mean, I don't know what the people who make stuff are doing all day long, but this would have been another great time to have a time machine. But it was I didn't do it, but it was the one time where I had thought, maybe I should send out a little something, on Facebook or to the the group that shows, like, hey, we kind of chunked that one.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to. 'cause
Well, I think people would
whatever.
enjoy hearing, or just here's the thought.
yeah.
I think people would enjoy. I would have enjoyed it.
I don't want to open it up afterward where people can keep saying things.
That's happened before.
What if they unravel?
One week
what
when
if
you
I
were
think I've got it
gone,
all right?
and Tony Jones had a conversation about the sacrifice of Isaac and all of that. Oh, there was ongoing Facebook conversations for a while, and somebody said, "Poor Doug, he leaves town, and we all lose our faith." We were chatting about it for a while. Yes,
See?
and maybe you're right to
See,
avoid
it's-
that.
It's not as easy as you might think doing this stuff. You let some amateur in there, and it just becomes
Tony
chaos.
Jones.
It just becomes chaos. You let the little league play on the big field, and the kids get tired running around the. Oh yeah.
idiot.
So anyway, I have been a long time proponent of collective wisdom, of the crowdsourcing, of the wisdom of the crowds when it comes to our spirituality, and even and on the micro level, that's crucial. But even at the smaller level, a preached sermon, it's such a gift, right? To be able to kind of say it as you see it, and then to have someone else say, "Well, it could be like this," and to be like, "Oh."
And sometimes, sometimes I can be
course it's
kind
like
of
that.
shy in big groups, and I have thoughts, and I don't always say them because I don't want to say them. And then every once in a while, if I do, and somebody is appreciative, I think, oh, that's what else were people thinking that they didn't say? We all
for
kinda
sure.
gotta
Oh, we
step
live in a
up.
world of holdbacks.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. The answer's out there. Somebody's holding back.
And so,
Somebody's
let's,
cheating us.
Speak up, people.
And sometimes we hold back and cheat people out of our ignorance, and sometimes out of our fear,
Yeah.
and sometimes out of our out of goodwill, and sometimes out of struggle.
Yeah.
But may we be those people, right, for whom that kind of thing doesn't become normative, but we can hear each other out. So I do think it's a story
Yep.
that the religious system then and now has an ability, has a tendency, has a reach.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take everything you got. And not in the good sense, not like the
No.
ultra running sense, which I can talk
No.
about now as an ultra runner. Not in the sense of like it's going to take everything, you've got what it takes, and it's
And
going to
you're
take
gonna
everything
find
you've
more
got.
than you
No,
had.
this thing's going to strip
It's
you
just gonna suck
down
you
like the
down.
top of a Kentucky, mountaintop.
Yeah, I used to always think, the world would be great if everybody would be,
Like
you
me.
know.
I've thought that many times too.
Like me.
Yeah.
Oh, where you're kind of trusting and generous, but you can get stripped down and
Oh.
shaken pretty fast. And then you're like, God, I got to toughen up here. I don't like it. I'd
Well,
rather not. So
That's
it
a
can be
larger,
tricky.
yeah. Isn't that the larger question in the whole thing? Like, how many times? It's easy to say to yourself, because there's some religious, in the Christian world, there's some religious input on this. How many times should you forgive somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 7 times,
Yeah.
70 times 7, like endlessly.
Right.
But how many times should you resist and protect yourself from someone who might have
Exactly.
once, 0, 70 times 7? That's
That's
So
the
forg-
rub. Figuring out how to be open, how to be generous, how to be forgiving, but still at the same time not be leaving yourself vulnerable to continual abuse.
boom. I don't know.
That's
So-
the rub.
Somebody
I don't
should figure that out after they make
Yeah.
a time machine. But,
know.
the two
One
things,
or the other.
the two things actually go pretty well together.
Yeah.
We're going to be back here after the break with the Cripes, Come On, You've Got to Be Kidding Me, and the Right On here on Pagitt Radio. Stick with us.